The classroom revelation. The question that started everything. Professor Kentha's four arms gestured wildly as he paced before his students at the Galactic Military Academy. His insectoid features twitched with what his species called nervous excitement. The question had been inevitable, really. Every semester, some curious student would ask about the famous human clause in galactic warfare regulations. Professor, Blix gurgled from his liquid containment unit, why exactly are humans banned from galactic combat? The official records just say, security concerns. The crystalline being named Naira chimed in, her voice like wind through crystal caves, surely they can't be that dangerous? They're just a single-planet species with basic technology. Professor Kentha's compound eyes darkened. He had hoped to avoid this topic until the advanced course, but his students were too curious for their own good. The gaseous entity known as Jorth swirled thoughtfully in his atmospheric suit, waiting for an answer. The weight of truth. Class dismissed, Professor Kentha announced suddenly, causing a collective groan throughout the amphitheater. But Professor! Blix protested, his gelatinous form rippling with indignation. You can't just leave us hanging like that. The old professor looked around at his eager students. Some had traveled light years to attend this academy. They deserved to know the truth, even if it would probably give them nightmares for cycles to come. Very well, he sighed, his antennae drooping. But understand this, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. The only reason I'm sharing this is because you'll encounter humans eventually in your careers, and you need to understand why they're treated differently. The Great Zephyrian War. Professor Kentha activated his holographic display, showing star maps from 3 centuries ago. The image showed the Zephyrian Empire at its height, controlling nearly a quarter of known space. The Great Zephyrian War began in 3576, he explained, his voice taking on the tone of someone recounting a horror story. The Zephyrians had conquered system after system, and the allied galactic forces were losing badly. We were desperate. Naira's crystal form pulsed with interest. That's when first contact with humanity occurred, right? Precisely. Professor Kentha's mandibles clicked nervously. The humans had just developed faster-than-light travel. They were primitive by our standards, still using chemical propulsion for atmospheric flight, still fighting wars with projectile weapons. Perfect cannon fodder, we thought. The recruitment. The professor's image changed to show a blue-green planet orbiting a yellow star. Earth. Such a peaceful-looking world. Our scouts reported that humans were divided into numerous competing factions, constantly at war with each other. They seemed ideal for our purposes. Jortha's gaseous form swirled with confusion. If they were always fighting each other, wouldn't that make them experienced warriors? That's exactly what we failed to consider, Professor Kentha replied grimly. We saw their conflicts as primitive tribalism. We didn't understand that they were constantly innovating, constantly finding new ways to solve problems, especially the problem of making their enemies stop existing. The first warning sign. The hologram shifted to show recruitment footage from the human world. Professor Kentha's voice grew quieter, more serious. The first warning sign should have been their response to our recruitment pitch. When Admiral Voss explained that we needed soldiers for a galactic war, most species would ask about pay, duration of service, or survival rates. You know what the humans asked? The students leaned forward, or in Blix's case, oozed forward with anticipation. They asked, what are the rules of engagement, and is there a list of banned weapons? Professor Kentha's compound eyes reflected the classroom lights ominously. When Admiral Voss told them there were no rules in galactic warfare, that anything goes as long as you win, the humans got very, very quiet. The silence that should have terrified us. The silence lasted for exactly 47 seconds, Professor Kentha continued. Later analysis showed that during those 47 seconds, the human representatives exchanged glances that their military would later classify as operational planning expressions. Naira's crystalline form chimed with concern. That doesn't sound good. It wasn't. The next thing they said was, when do we start? But it was the way they said it. Our xenopsychologists later described it as the same tone a child might use when asking if they could play with explosives. The enthusiasm that doomed us all. Professor Kentha's antennae twitched as he recalled the historical records. The humans didn't just agree to help, they volunteered their entire military structure. They offered to bring their weapons, their vehicles, their tactics. They seemed almost excited about the prospect of unlimited warfare. But that's good, right? Blix bubbled hopefully. Enthusiastic allies are better than reluctant ones. Oh, my dear student, Professor Kent said with the patience of someone who had seen the aftermath reports. You have no idea what human enthusiasm looks like when applied to warfare. They didn't just want to fight, they wanted to win. And they had very specific ideas about how to accomplish that. The professor paused, looking around at his students' eager faces. Next time, I'll tell you about their first day on the battlefield. But for now, I want you to research something. Look up the human concept called total war, and try to imagine what happens when you give that mindset unlimited resources and no rules. As the students filed out, chattering excitedly among themselves, Professor Kent couldn't help but notice how innocent they all seemed. Soon, they would understand why the mere mention of humanity in military contexts caused experienced galactic commanders to request transfers to peaceful sectors. The truth was coming, whether they were ready for it or not. The recruitment mistake. The desperate alliance. Admiral Voss floated in his command tank aboard the flagship Tidal Force, his gill slits fluttering with anxiety. The aquatic commander had seen 3 fleets destroyed in the past lunar cycle, and the Zephyrian advance showed no signs of slowing. His translucent skin rippled with stress patterns as he reviewed the casualty reports. Admiral, Commander Ilox announced, his reptilian scales shifting to a formal blue-gray pattern. The human delegation has arrived. Through the reinforced viewport, Voss could see the primitive human vessel docking with their ship. It was a crude thing, all sharp angles and chemical propulsion systems. The humans themselves were even more primitive, requiring atmospheric suits just to survive in civilized environments. First Contact Protocol. Captain Hendrik stepped through the airlock, his boots making strange clicking sounds on the deck plating. He was tall for his species, with the peculiar fur that humans grew on their faces. His eyes, those unsettling forward-facing predator eyes, scanned the bridge with what Voss assumed was curiosity. "Welcome aboard, Captain," Admiral Voss gurgled through his translation unit. "We appreciate your species' willingness to assist in our struggle against the Zephyrian Empire." "Our pleasure, Admiral," Hendrik replied, his voice carrying an odd undertone that the universal translator couldn't quite process. "We've reviewed your tactical reports. Impressive enemy capabilities." Commander Ilox's scales shifted to a nervous yellow. "Impressive? They've destroyed everything we've sent against them. Our projected casualties for the next engagement are 70% minimum." The human response. Captain Hendrik nodded slowly, that strange expression humans called a smile spreading across his features. 70% casualties assuming conventional tactics, correct? "Well, yes," Voss bubbled uncertainly. "What other kind of tactics are there?" "Oh, you'd be surprised," Hendrik said, producing a small device from his equipment harness. "We brought some preliminary combat analysis." "May I?" The device projected a holographic display showing the recent battle formations. But instead of the standard tactical overview, the human analysis was different. Where galactic military doctrine saw ship formations and fleet movements, the human display showed supply lines, communication networks, and what their files labeled as critical infrastructure targets. The uncomfortable questions. "Your enemy relies heavily on centralized command structures," Hendrik observed, pointing to nodes in the display. "What happens if those command ships were to suffer catastrophic system failures?" Commander Ilox's scales rippled with confusion. System failures? You mean battle damage? Not exactly, Hendrik replied. We noticed your weapons are designed for ship-to-ship combat. Very honorable. Very direct. But what about the space stations supporting their fleet? The manufacturing facilities? The civilian shipping that keeps their war machine supplied? Admiral Voss felt his gill slits constrict. Captain, those are non-military targets. The Galactic Warfare Convention clearly states. Admiral, Hendrik interrupted gently, you did say there are no rules in this conflict, correct? That anything goes as long as we win. The misunderstanding. The silence that followed was pregnant with implications. Voss exchanged glances with Ilox, both recognizing that they might have miscommunicated something important. When we said anything goes, Voss clarified carefully, we meant in terms of weapons technology and tactical flexibility. Not, whatever it is you're suggesting. Hendrik's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. I see. So you want us to fight with honor and restraint against an enemy that's been wiping out your fleets? Well, yes, Ilox said, his scales shifting to a hopeful green. That's how civilized species conduct warfare. The human perspective. Civilized warfare, Hendrik repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. Admiral, with respect, your civilization is about to be extinct. The Zephyrians aren't showing restraint. They're not fighting with honor. They're winning. He gestured to the tactical display. In the past month, they've destroyed 43 of your ships, killed over 2 million of your people, and occupied 12 star systems. How's that honor and restraint working out for you? Commander Ilox's scales flushed angry red. That's not the point. There are proper ways to conduct warfare. And there are effective ways, Hendrik countered. You can choose to lose honorably, or you can choose to win. But you can't choose both. The demonstration. Captain Hendrik activated another display, showing human historical conflicts. This is how my species handles existential threats. We don't fight armies, we fight wars. We don't target ships, we target the ability to build ships. We don't defeat enemies, we remove their capacity to be enemies. The images showed human conflicts throughout their history, cities reduced to rubble, entire industrial complexes systematically destroyed, supply lines severed with surgical precision. Your species has been at war for its entire recorded history, Voss observed, his voice hollow with dawning realization. Exactly, Hendrik confirmed. And we've gotten very, very good at it. We've learned that the most humane way to fight a war is to end it as quickly as possible. Half measures just prolong the suffering. The point of no return. Admiral Voss felt the water in his tank growing cold. Captain, are you suggesting we abandon the principles of civilized warfare? I'm suggesting you abandon the principles that are getting you killed, Hendrik replied. You asked for our help. This is what human help looks like. The human captain leaned forward, his predator eyes fixed on the admiral. You can fight this war your way and lose everything you hold dear. Or you can fight it our way and actually have a chance of protecting what matters. Commander Ilox's scales had shifted to a pattern neither Voss nor the computer could interpret. What exactly are you proposing? Hendrik smiled again, but this time it was the expression of a predator contemplating prey. We're proposing to solve your Zephyrian problem. Permanently. But we're going to do it the human way. The contract. As the meeting concluded, Admiral Voss found himself agreeing to terms he didn't fully understand. The humans would provide military assistance, but with full operational autonomy. They would follow their own rules of engagement, their own tactical doctrines, their own definitions of acceptable targets. One final question, Captain, Voss gurgled as the delegation prepared to leave. What exactly do you mean by the human way? Hendrik paused at the airlock, his expression thoughtful. Admiral, has anyone ever explained to you what humans consider a proportional response to an existential threat? No, Voss replied, though he was beginning to suspect he should have asked earlier. You're about to find out, Hendrik said. And Admiral? You might want to warn your historians to start preparing comprehensive documentation. Future generations are going to need detailed records of what happened here, if only to understand why humans are never again allowed to help with galactic conflicts. The airlock sealed behind the human delegation, leaving Admiral Voss alone with the growing certainty that his species had just made a terrible mistake. The Geneva Suggestion. The Battlefield Brief. General Marcus Stone stood before the holographic display in the temporary command center, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. The converted asteroid facility hummed with activity as human technicians integrated their equipment with alien technology. Around him, officers from a dozen different species watched with barely concealed nervousness. Ambassador Crix, a graceful avian diplomat with iridescent feathers, perched uneasily on her specialized chair. General Stone, the Galactic Council has expressed some concerns about your operational proposals. Concerns? Lieutenant Torres looked up from her tactical display, her young face showing genuine confusion. About what? The general's expression remained neutral, but those who knew him could see the slight tightening around his eyes. The ambassador is referring to our strategic assessment of Zephyrian infrastructure targets. The misunderstanding. Commander Ilox's scales shifted to an uncomfortable orange. General, when you submitted your targeting list, we assumed there had been some sort of translation error. Civilian population centers, agricultural facilities, manufacturing planets, these aren't military targets. With respect, Commander, General Stone replied, everything that supports an enemy's war effort is a military target. The Zephyrians can't fight if they can't eat, can't build ships, or can't fuel their fleets. Ambassador Crix's feathers ruffled with distress. But General, surely you understand the difference between combatants and non-combatants? Lieutenant Torres exchanged glances with her superior. Ma'am, are you familiar with the concept of total war? Total war? The ambassador's voice carried a note of confusion. I'm not familiar with that term. The history lesson. General Stone activated a new display, showing Earth's historical conflicts. Ambassador, for the past several thousand years, my species has been refining the art of warfare. We've learned that half measures in existential conflicts lead to prolonged suffering and ultimately, defeat. The images showed human conflicts throughout history, strategic bombing campaigns, economic warfare, siege tactics that targeted entire populations. During our Second World War, Stone continued, we faced an enemy that threatened our very existence. We didn't just fight their armies, we fought their ability to wage war. We targeted their factories, their supply lines, their means of production. Commander Ilox's scales had shifted to a sickly yellow. You targeted civilians? We targeted the infrastructure that allowed their military to function, Lieutenant Torres corrected. The civilians were collateral considerations. The Geneva Conventions. Ambassador Crix's voice trembled slightly. Surely your species has some sort of moral framework for warfare? Some limitations on acceptable conduct? General Stone nodded slowly. We do. They're called the Geneva Conventions. Very comprehensive set of rules about how to conduct warfare humanely. Relief flooded through the alien officers. Commander Ilox's scales shifted to a hopeful blue. Excellent. So you do understand the concept of proportional response and protected targets. Oh, we understand it perfectly, Stone replied. The Geneva Conventions are very clear about what constitutes a war crime. Then you'll modify your targeting parameters? Ambassador Crix asked hopefully. Lieutenant Torres looked confused. Why would we do that? The loophole. The silence that followed was deafening. General Stone cleared his throat and activated another display. The Geneva Conventions apply to conflicts between signatory nations of Earth. The Zephyrian Empire never signed the Geneva Conventions. But surely the spirit of the agreement, Ambassador Crix began. The spirit of the agreement, Stone interrupted, is to prevent unnecessary suffering in warfare between civilized nations. The Zephyrians have demonstrated that they don't recognize civilian targets as protected. They've bombed refugee ships, targeted hospitals, and executed prisoners. Commander Ilox's scales rippled with uncomfortable realization. So you're saying? I'm saying that the Zephyrians have chosen to fight outside the boundaries of civilized warfare, Stone confirmed. We're simply responding in kind. The operational plan. Lieutenant Torres stepped forward, her voice taking on the clinical tone of a briefing officer. Our operational plan is actually quite humanitarian when you consider the alternatives. She activated a tactical display showing Zephyrian space. Option 1. Continue conventional warfare. Projected duration, 15 to 20 years. Projected casualties, approximately 400 million on both sides. The display shifted to show the human proposal. Option 2. Systematic deconstruction of Zephyrian warmaking capacity. Projected duration, 6 to 8 months. Projected casualties, approximately 50 million, mostly military. Ambassador Crix's feathers had gone completely white. 50 million casualties in 8 months? Versus 400 million over 20 years, Torres replied matter-of-factly. We're actually saving lives with this approach. The philosophical debate. But the method? Commander Ilox protested, his scales flashing rapid patterns of distress. You're talking about systematically destroying entire worlds. Not destroying, General Stone corrected. Neutralizing. There's a difference. What difference? Ambassador Crix demanded. Destroying implies wanton annihilation, Stone explained patiently. Neutralizing means removing specific capabilities while minimizing unnecessary destruction. We're not going to glass planets, we're going to make them incapable of supporting military operations. Lieutenant Torres nodded enthusiastically. It's actually quite elegant. We disable their industrial capacity, disrupt their supply chains, and eliminate their command structure. The civilian population remains largely intact. The weapons discussion. And how exactly do you propose to accomplish this? Commander Ilox asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. General Stone exchanged glances with his aide. Well, that depends on the specific target. For manufacturing worlds, we're thinking targeted electromagnetic pulses to disable machinery without killing people. For agricultural planets, selective defoliation of military-relevant crops. For command centers. Yes? Ambassador Crix prompted weakly. For command centers, we get creative, Lieutenant Torres said with what humans called enthusiasm. We've developed some interesting applications for gravity manipulation technology. Gravity manipulation? The ambassador's voice was barely a whisper. Localized gravitational anomalies, Stone explained. Think of it as a very precise way to make buildings fall down. Much more humane than conventional explosives. The realization. The alien officers stared at the humans in growing horror. Commander Ilox's scales had shifted to a pattern that the computer couldn't translate, but which roughly corresponded to existential dread. General, Ambassador Crix said carefully, are you telling us that your species has weaponized the fundamental forces of physics? Not weaponized, Stone corrected. Repurposed. We prefer to think of it as creative problem-solving. Creative problem-solving, the ambassador repeated faintly. The key insight, Lieutenant Torres added helpfully, is that every problem has a solution if you're willing to think outside conventional parameters. The Zephyrians think they're fighting a war. We're actually conducting a large-scale engineering project. The warning. As the briefing concluded, General Stone noticed the expressions on the alien faces around him. Is there a problem with our operational plan? Ambassador Crix's feathers had begun to molt from stress. General, I think there may have been a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of this conflict. How so? We thought we were hiring soldiers, she said quietly. We appear to have hired something else entirely. General Stone's expression remained neutral, but there was something unsettling about his smile. Ambassador, you hired humans. This is what human warfare looks like when we're not constrained by our own moral frameworks. And that doesn't concern you? Why would it? Stone asked genuinely. You have a problem. We have a solution. The only question is whether you want to win this war or lose it with honor. The silence that followed would later be recorded in galactic history as the moment when the galaxy realized that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their tactics. It was their complete inability to recognize when they had gone too far. Weaponizing the impossible. The Laboratory of Horrors. Dr. Vincent Reed adjusted his glasses as he surveyed the converted mining facility that had become humanity's primary research and development center. The cavernous space buzzed with activity as teams of human engineers worked alongside bewildered alien technicians. What had started as a simple equipment integration project had evolved into something far more ambitious. Engineer Zach, a mechanical being whose body was composed of self-repairing nanomachines, observed the proceedings with growing alarm. His optical sensors tracked human scientists as they cheerfully violated what he had previously considered immutable laws of physics. Dr. Reed, Zach's voice carried the electronic equivalent of concern, I must protest your team's interpretation of standard military equipment. Colonel Nash looked up from a device that seemed to be humming with barely contained energy. What's the problem, Zach? Everything we're building falls within the parameters of conventional warfare. Colonel, that device appears to be a portable singularity generator. Correct, Nash replied with the enthusiasm of someone discussing the weather. Very effective for breaching fortified positions. The breakfast incident. Dr. Reed chuckled as he remembered the morning's events. You should have seen Admiral Voss's reaction when he found out we'd militarized the food synthesizers. Engineer Zach's optical array flickered with confusion. I fail to understand how food preparation equipment constitutes a weapon. Well, Dr. Reed began, pulling up a holographic display. It turns out that if you modify the molecular assembly process just slightly, you can synthesize more than just food. Explosives, corrosives, even complex pharmaceutical compounds. You weaponized your breakfast machine? We weaponized everything, Colonel Nash said proudly. The cleaning robots now double as reconnaissance drones. The atmospheric processors can generate chemical weapons. Even the waste recycling systems have been modified to produce ammunition. Engineer Zach's mechanical form shuddered. That seems excessive. Excessive? Dr. Reed looked genuinely puzzled. Zach, we're at war. The efficient utilization of available resources is just good military doctrine. The gravity hammer. In the center of the facility, a team of human physicists worked on what they casually referred to as the gravity hammer. The device looked deceptively simple, a metallic cylinder about the size of a human torso, covered in warning labels in 17 different languages. Dr. Reed, Engineer Zach ventured, what exactly does that device do? It creates localized gravitational anomalies, Dr. Reed explained matter-of-factly. Point it at a target, activate it, and the target experiences approximately 50 times normal gravity for about 30 seconds. That would crush anything organic instantly. Well, yes, Colonel Nash agreed. That's rather the point. Engineer Zach's optical sensors dimmed. But the energy requirements for such a device should be enormous. How are you powering it? Dr. Reed's expression brightened. Oh, that's the clever part. We discovered that if you create a controlled microblack hole and then immediately destabilize it, the resulting energy release is more than sufficient to power the gravitational field generators. You're using black holes as batteries? Microblack holes, Dr. Reed corrected. Completely different thing. Much safer. The quantum entanglement network. In another section of the facility, a team of human communications specialists had been working on what they called quantum message in a bottle. Engineer Zach observed their work with growing concern. The concept is simple, explained Dr. Sarah Kim, the project lead. We quantum entangle particles and then separate them across vast distances. When we manipulate one particle, its entangled partner responds instantaneously, regardless of distance. That's actually quite impressive, Zach admitted. Instantaneous communication across galactic distances would revolutionize coordination between forces. Communication? Dr. Kim looked confused. Oh, we're not using it for communication. We're using it for remote detonation. Engineer Zach's optical array flickered rapidly. Remote detonation? Quantum entangled explosives, Colonel Nash explained helpfully. We can place charges anywhere in the galaxy and detonate them from here. No delay, no possibility of jamming, no way to prevent activation. That's terrifying. That's effective, Dr. Reed corrected. The Zephyrians won't know what hit them. The dimensional folding experiment. The most disturbing project, in Engineer Zach's opinion, was taking place in a sealed chamber at the far end of the facility. The human team working on it had been classified as hazardous personnel and required special authorization just to enter their work area. Dr. Reed, Zach asked carefully, what exactly is Project Origami? Spatial manipulation, Dr. Reed replied. We're learning to fold spacetime like paper. Very useful for transportation and logistics. And warfare? Oh, absolutely. Imagine being able to fold space so that an enemy's weapon fire goes through a portal and hits their own ships. Or folding space around a planet so that it exists in multiple locations simultaneously. Engineer Zach's mechanical form began to emit warning beeps. Dr. Reed, you're describing the fundamental restructuring of reality itself. Only locally, Colonel Nash said reassuringly. We're not crazy enough to try it on a galactic scale. Yet, Dr. Reed added thoughtfully. The philosophical implications. As the day progressed, Engineer Zach found himself in increasingly disturbing conversations with the human research teams. Each project seemed to violate not just the laws of physics, but the basic principles of rational thought. Dr. Reed, Zach finally asked, do you ever consider whether you should do something, rather than simply whether you can? Should? Dr. Reed looked puzzled. Zach, we're at war. The only relevant question is whether something helps us win. But surely there are limits to what civilized beings should do, even in warfare? Colonel Nash laughed, a sound that made Zach's audio processors recoil. Zach, my friend, you're thinking like a civilized being. We're thinking like humans. What's the difference? Civilized beings have limits, Dr. Reed explained patiently. Humans have solutions. The demonstration. To prove his point, Dr. Reed led Engineer Zach to a testing chamber where a team was preparing to demonstrate their latest creation. The device looked like a simple handheld scanner, but the warning label suggested it was something far more dangerous. This is the molecular disruptor, Dr. Reed announced proudly. It breaks the bonds between molecules in the target material. What does that mean in practical terms? Zach asked. Point it at a steel wall, pull the trigger, and the wall turns into a cloud of iron and carbon atoms, Colonel Nash explained. Very effective against armor. And organic matter? Works on that too, Dr. Reed said cheerfully. Though the cleanup is a bit more challenging. Engineer Zach watched in horror as the device was tested on a block of composite armor. The material didn't explode or melt, it simply ceased to exist as a solid object, becoming a harmless cloud of component atoms. The realization. As the demonstration concluded, Engineer Zach finally understood what had been bothering him about the human research facility. It wasn't just that they were creating devastating weapons, it was that they were doing it with such casual enthusiasm. Dr. Reed, he said carefully, do you realize what you've created here? A comprehensive military research facility? Dr. Reed replied. You've created a laboratory for ending reality as we know it. Colonel Nash shrugged. Reality is overrated. We prefer solutions. But the implications. The implications, Dr. Reed interrupted, are that the Zephyrians picked the wrong species to fight. They wanted a war. We're giving them an apocalypse. Engineer Zach's optical array dimmed as he processed this statement. Dr. Reed, I think I'm beginning to understand why your species might be considered dangerous. Dangerous? Dr. Reed looked genuinely confused. Zach, we're the good guys. We're here to help. Help with what? Help end this war, Colonel Nash said simply. Permanently. As Engineer Zach left the facility, he found himself composing what he realized might be his final report to the Galactic Council. The humans weren't just winning the war, they were redefining what warfare meant. And that, he realized with growing dread, might be the most terrifying victory of all.